I'm sort of a cross between a lot of people.
It was a sort of a strange child of Bob Dylan and Phil Spector and the dreams of possibilities.
I was a really big fan, as much of his attitude as of his music.
Mark wanted to be a pop star. And they say you have to be careful what you pray for.
He just wanted to be God. You know, he wanted to be a huge Elvis icon figure.
There was nothing bigger than T-Rex in the UK. T-Rex were bigger than the Beatles ever were.
Mark will be 50 this year. I only knew him as far as he was 29.
I dance myself into the tomb.
You realize the years that have gone, and then you're happy that people have remembered, because all he ever wanted was love.
I always kind of wonder, and it's kind of like it'd be a totally different world if my dad did not pass away. Where would I be?
I truly miss him, especially the time of coming towards the anniversary. I can always feel that pain.
He wasn't an angel. He wasn't perfect, but he could still fly.
He wanted to be famous from the age of 9. Once he got that idea in, there was nothing that would knock him down.
He wanted to be top dog right from that early period, and mod was his outlet to start with.
Everybody that admired what he used to wear. I don't know where he got the money from. I think his parents were just a poor family working for a Jewish family.
He had a Vespa. I think he actually sat on the Vespa. I don't think he actually rode the Vespa. He never had a driver's license.
He was a man about town initially, looking for a chance of fame. He was a hustling type. He made sure his face appeared at the right places.
He was going to be the next big thing, and he was going to be bigger than Elvis and bigger than the Beatles. And I mean, he would say things like that. You know, we'd have to sit down, Mark, you know, have a Coca-Cola, you know, when you're old enough to buy a proper drink and make a record, come back and talk to us again.
Yeah, Brad, you know she's back. Been 6 weeks since she blew her stack.
Somebody phoned up and just said they thought they were going to be a pop star, and could they send a tape? Then they wanted to meet me, and it happens all the time, so I said, we'll just send a tape round. And they said, oh, I'm in the neighbourhood, can I drop the tape in myself, which I didn't really want.
Simon Napier Bell was the epitome of the Epicurean, hedonistic, homosexual manager of the mid-60s.
And 10 minutes later, there's a knock on my door, and that was Mark Bolan. And he said, actually, I don't have a tape, but I've got my guitar with me, I can play some songs for you.
When they couldn't get very far with Mark's solo career, Napier Bell then placed him in an art pop band called John's Children, almost as like a Pete Townsend type figure.
It seemed an absurd thing to do. I mean, John's Children were a group I'd signed up just because they were very attractive people.
I'm dizzy from wanting you. My eyes are getting tired.
We were really quite appalling musicians at the time. We produced that noise. It was a mixture of incompetence and couldn't give a shit.
It was kind of like an Iggy act, except that they didn't have the songs.
We needed a new guitarist, and so Simon said to me one day that I've got this guy that I'm also managing, sort of folk guitarist. I'll introduce you to him. This is the first time that he was introduced to amplifiers.
And he sort of stood there and, you know, plugged it in and then turned everything up full.
It was just amazing.
Whack!
Sound.
I mean, he almost fell over.
When we did a tour with The Who in Germany, and we got thrown off the chart in 4 days because we'd upstaged them 4 nights running, but we sat around thinking of things to do to upstage The Who, which is pretty difficult, upstaging The Who.
Mark was well into it by then.
Yeah, I mean, he would guitar on his head, thrash his guitar with chains.
He bought a big chain from the market and stuff.
You know, lay on the floor with the guitar feeding back, you know.
He was swishing this chain. I remember the whole front row of the audience. It was like a Mexican wave. It's great stuff. It did go over the top, because I think you did the thing. He smashed the chair and then said, now you do it. And of course, it was doing, yes.
Wow. And the whole audience went.
And they just went berserk.
We got the audience in Nuremberg so worked up that the whole place got destroyed. The police came in.
We had to run for it, basically, when we got out the back and we just shot for the border and ended up in Luxembourg.
I saw a poster saying Ravi Shankar was playing a concert, so I thought it'd be great. We'll go and see Ravi Shankar. But what a nice civilised thing to do after this very uncivilised tour.
Very strange. The next thing that he's appeared in was this.
He was doing
similar
bongos with
bongos.
Incense.
He probably thought it was safer bet there.
Probably
with
thought
the
it
old,
was safer, yeah.
He really wanted to be a solo star and a part of a group at the same time. So what he decided to do was to pursue his own career under the guise of a group name.
Tyrannosaurus Rex's stage act mainly consisted of Bolan and his sidekick Steve Peregrine Took sitting cross-legged on the stage. It was not really a particularly visual act.
They'd all sit down on the floor cross-legged the same as him. They'd get their joysticks out and they'd all be lighting the joysticks.
I used to sit in my Oxfam fur coat, cross-legged on the floor and watch them play in their Oxfam fur coats. Yeah, Mark was a bit special.
He was like a little prophet. He just sort of sat there and for some reason he had this charisma that everybody would sort of just do exactly what he wanted.
Nobody ever understood the lyrics. I mean, that was never important. He didn't know what he was singing about, I'm sure. It was just it just sounded good.
He was rather like Dylan. He was much closer to Dylan than most people would imagine in that he did write fabulous poetry. A Warlock of Love is a serious collection of poetry, there's no doubt in my mind at all.
So the words to me are important. But without going through every individual song, I couldn't explain to you. But they're sort of surreal words, really. Surrealistic.
There's a crawling sensation, an astral vibration that's sucking me into your sight. I can tell by your hair in the juniper chair and the piratey twist of your mouth. I've constructed your frame in a plasticine game, and your eyes are the sweets of my youth. But I'm naked and bare in the ice of your stare, and I'm useless at telling the truth.
What about as a lyricist and a poet?
The worst for me. He was the worst. I used to say to him, Bubba and Mark. What's this? He said, Eric, I've got this wonderful poem I've written. The swallow went on the hill fell down, and the swallow fell down, and they come back to Hampstead. I said, pardon? That's a poem, you schmuck, there's no rhyme.
You know, quite honestly, it didn't make a lot of sense to me and a lot of people, and I'm not even sure Mark remembered why he would put certain words together. And I think he put certain words together just because they were musical sounding, like Salamander Palaganda. What does that mean?
Of course, 1967 was a fantastic period for acid and dope.
There was a lot of drugs in the 60s, but I never was aware of Mark having taken any. He was very against it.
In his own words, he said, I'm already frightened of my head now. I can't imagine what it would be like. He was the first person I met of my own generation who didn't go along with the party line, which was to take psychedelic drugs and to freak out, man, and all that.
I suspect, in retrospect, he always was very determined and ambitious and wanted to become a huge pop star.
His determination at that time was fantastic and was really highlighted when June Child came into his life.
June was very strong. He could still play that guise of that mystical hippie, whereas June behind the scenes was making sure things were right for him.
There are certain chords, there are magic mists within those chords. You play a sort of C major chord, and I hear like 25 melodies and symphonies up here. I've just got to pull one out, you know, bring da 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 da, you know, just anything. It's all there. There's no strain, it just gushes out. You know.
Mark had knowledge that goes beyond study, something that one can't measure.
We are the children of Ron. We've trodden.
I just thought the whole Tyrannosaurus Rex thing was so pretentious and phony that I couldn't believe in it.
We are the children of Ron.
He sings Dragon's Ear and the Children of Ron, thinking of Stonehenge, of the giant figures of horses and men carved in the chalk hills.
People took it so seriously. I mean, dear old John Peel even fell for it.
John Peel used to get letters from irate listeners saying, "What are you doing? You keep playing this chap with this Larry the Lamb voice, get it off."
Nobody made Mark Bolan except Mark Bolan. But Peel made it a hell of a lot easier.
Peel would go out and do his gigs and he'd get paid. He was very popular. And he'd give half his fee to Bolan. He'd just take Mark along with him.
While Mark looked the part of the perfect hippie, Steve Peregrine Took played it. He was in and out of every drug den in Ladbroke Grove, off his face most of the time, really enjoying himself, but to the detriment of his playing and his responsibility as part of the Tyrannosaurus Rex duo.
Steve kind of said, well, it's 3 albums now, Mark. I'd like to do some of my songs. That was the end of the relationship.
Essentially, once Took left, or was bounced, or whatever, T-Rex was Mark and whoever.
I'm not gonna dance with my princess by the light of a
Mark was looking for somebody to replace Steve, and I had known Mickey Finn for a long time. He'd been an old friend of mine. I brought the two of them together, and no one was more surprised than me than when he ended up being part of the band.
And we just got on like a house on fire. I mean, it was just magic. We just played, sung, spoke about rock and roll.
Mickey Finn was pretty much a yes man. He was there for the ride, he was there for the fun, the women, and the excitement.
And it's like we always knew each other. You know, somebody you find infinity with, you feel like you've always known him. And that's what it was like with Mark.
I love every dance with my baby.
He didn't love Mickey necessarily for his musical skills, but he wanted a good-looking foil to take with him.
T-Rex was the only band that came out of, the acoustic flower hippie thing and actually did a complete transformation into something different.
Tyrannosaurus Rex had built up a large and growing and very faithful constituency, but it was time for the next move. It was time for T-Rex.
If we've got any claim to fame, it's actually getting the name right, which call it, shortening it from Tyrannosaurus to T-Rex, and getting him to stand up. And then it went electric, and it went big.
I don't think it was particularly controversial when Tyrannosaurus Rex went from being acoustic to electric. The real controversy was when Mark Bolan decided that he was going to abandon hippie values entirely.
I remember having a conversation with Mark about spiritual things, and he said, he was putting it on hold while he kind of persevered with his own career. And he said, I'll buy an island and then I'll settle down and I'll get into spiritual things then.
Mark was really in love with Mark Bolan. I mean, he would literally say, watch me fly, I am going to be a rock god.
The underground were terribly condescending.
I was always a cultural snob, and I thought there was something rather good about what he was doing, and that he just made vulgar pop records.
If you want to use a car to go riding next Sunday.
I was probably about 15 maybe, and there was this 3-day long 24-hour-a-day music festival. The audience was full of hippies, and Mark had just done his complete turnaround from a hippie to the sort of rock and roll god. As Mark Bolan came on the stage, the whole audience got up and booed.
Mark Bolan had sold out, but had he ever sold in the first place? That was the more important question.
So we just thought, well, what's he going to do? And the first thing he did was he leant into the microphone and said, "Fuck off." And they all shut up and sat down.
There's always this presence even now today in hip-hop music, the underground culture. Sometimes becoming underground is just an excuse not to make it big. You know what I mean? I believe you got to make it. If you're going to make it, you got to go for the gold. Some people don't want to be all the way, but my dad was smart enough to say, I can do both.
Write it all out like a bird in the sky was. Write it all out like you were a bird.
Summer of 1970, I was the disc jockey at the Isle of Wight Festival, and I played it every set. So by the end, 600,000 people had Ride a White Swan in their heads.
Like the druid in the old days, wear a tall hat and a tattooed gown. Ride a white swan like the people of a Belgium. Wear your hair long, babe, you can't go wrong.
Ride a White Swan still had the fantasy, it still had the Tolkien element strongly there in the lyrics.
Catch a bright star and a placing on your forehead. Say a few spells and baby, there you go. Take a black cat and a sit you down.
I think he decided it was time that rock reconnected with the pop audience.
It was Mark Bolan on the one hand looking back and on the other hand looking forward.
There was a kind of gap in the market. We hadn't quite got the sort of the Osmonds, American Jackson 5 thing, and yet the whole Beatles thing was well over.
Lots of people talk about T-Rex as being their first musical love affair.
I just became obsessed with Mark Bolan for the next, say, 4 years of my life, really.
The thing at the time was they were the first sign of hysteria since the Beatles.
I got my first guitar because of Mark Bolan. That's how he affected me.
It took 3 months to get up the charts. It stopped at number 2. The final indignity was it was kept off the number 1 spot by the Christmas novelty song Grandad by Clive Dunn.
Lovely song. I've been all alone dreaming. Oh, what a lovely record.
Which was plugged by Eric Hall.
He used to say to me, he'd phone me up in those days, you know, because, how's Grandad doing? I said, well, sold 65,000 today. Really? Did it? Oh, all right. Well, can't you stop plugging it, my dear? You stop plugging it. I said, no, I can't stop plugging it. I get paid to plug it. It's a lovely record. I said, I think I'm joking one day. I said, you should do a duet with him. The next record you should do a Clive and Mark together. Call it Grandma.
Started out as an underground band, supposedly, or a minority band, and we've become like the biggest media band for like 5 years or something, which for me is really weird, because many people used to say, you know, Mark, with your funny little voice, man, you know, you're never going to sell any records. So that was a strange one, you know.
He was on top of the pops and then in Jackie as soon as we could get him. And we went to inordinate lengths to print 3-page pin-up photographs of him. And, you know, so they'd have the double page spread in the middle of the magazine, and you'd give them the middle bit the first week, and then the feet the second week, and the head the third week. So you'd make them buy all 3 weeks, because if you just gave them the head, they wouldn't bother with the rest.
She's my woman of gold, and she's not very old, She's my woman of gold, and she's not very old.
He brought back a spirit that groups can have a lot of fun making records and a lot of fun dressing up. The whole glam thing was a big revolution in the way musicians thought.
Chelita Secunda came into the camp. Chelita was the one that dressed Mark.
Well, I put the glitter on him. I suppose that was the big one, because in the 60s I used to wear a lot of glitter.
Chelita really invented glam rock, I guess.
She's faster than most, and she lives on the coast.
And introduced him to Sandra Rhodes. She gave him shirts and things. And I took him to meet John Lloyd at Alcazura, who made sort of suits which I wore and which Mark wore in nearly every colour under the sun.
Mark was the first person to wear women's shoes, wore those sort of character shoes with the bar across.
He was well up for it. He was always quite camp, Mark, and it was fun.
Mark wanted to look pretty. He was very beautiful at a time when men did not want to be quote-unquote beautiful.
There was a sort of vainness in his vocal style as well, quite soft, although there was the occasional growl and ow!
fans. The fans were insane.
I saw them in Bellevue, in Manchester, and it was just a complete mess, a very exciting mess. But you couldn't actually hear the music because people just kept screaming.
He changed everything. He opened the door for David Bowie. And then, as in every movement, people came along who weren't as good. Gary Glitter, bless his codpiece, was no Marc Bolan.
Even the Beatles, I think it was Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr, acknowledged in an interview that T-Rex were bigger than the Beatles ever were in the UK.
Well, I was very flattered because all the Beatles in their own way said that we were like their successors. I'm not sure that it's true, but I'm very, very flattered. It's nice, it's an encouraging thing, you know.
He was just a very confident, but then as well cocky, but then he was a star. And he did what he wanted to do, and he lived his life like that.
Little girls like non-threatening, not overtly sexual boys.
So much about Mark's look and about his sound was sexual, and I think that wasn't lost on a lot of his teenage audience.
It's that boyish quality, that cute sort of cheekiness that's not going to be sexually threatening, and he had that in spades.
When he sang stuff like "Girl, You're Good" and "I've Got Wild Knees for You," I mean, there's nothing ostensibly rude about it. And he had a really good way of saying something that was very sexual, but it wasn't obvious.
His whole look was very androgynous. I didn't really relate to him in a sexual way. Perhaps I wanted to look like him rather than shag him.
T-Rex at the very beginning was Mark, then he had Mickey, and there was a very strong image thing.
People would like to say it was chance, that we just happened to get Bill Legend, that we just happened to get Steve Curry, that they could have been anybody. And even Mark underemphasized how great those musicians were. Bill's name is actually Bill Fifield, but Mark didn't like Fifield, so he changed his name to Bill. Mark changed Bill's name to Bill Legend.
Mark came out of his room and beckoned me to come and have a listen to something, and I went along and he said, "Well, you got any drums in your room?" I said, "I've got a snare drum as it happens." I was twiddling around on it or something. He said, "Bring it along." So I went into the room and we both sat cross-legged opposite each other in his room, and he had an acoustic and he played this song. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Yeah, it's got possibilities."
I think John Peel found it a bit strange when Mark went electric.
John had a column at that time in Disco Music Echo, and he'd been kind of all right about Ride a White Swan, very lukewarm about Hot Love, but he really took a stance with Get It On. He didn't like it.
He just didn't like the song, and he said he wasn't going to play it. Basically, Bolan dropped him. I mean, that was the nasty side of Mark, I think.
The Peel thing is emblematic because Bolan forgot that you should be decent to the people you meet on your way up, because you might meet them again on the way down.
You know, he was known to discard people. He had more managers than Henry VIII had wives.
I'm quite prepared to be a dustman tomorrow if I have to be, you know. It's not relevant, it's not even important. What's important is that even if that happened, see, I know that I'd go out and I'd press my own records with a hand presser, you know, and go and give them to people.
He knew a fair amount about blues, but he was not a blues train spotter.
He used basic chords and he used basic rock patterns and he stole rock and roll patterns from great oldies.
I mean, you can hear how he listened to Howlin' Wolf by checking out Jeepster. I mean, Jeepster is a wholesale rip of a Howlin' Wolf tune called You'll Be Mine.
He used something that was very traditional and very simple and add his own little twist to it. One chord.
I don't think there was anything that was calculated.
You're so sweet. You're so...
It was simply that he had the knack, picking up something in his mind that he heard, read from a book, snatches.
When we were on it, I said, how do you can you write so many songs so quick? He said, oh, just get them out of the air, man. Just get them out of the air.
That Wolf track had been around for years, but nobody had heard it as pop. Boland turned it into a pop song. I mean, you would not find Howlin' Wolf singing a line like "You've got the universe reclining in your hair."
You slide so good, with bones so fair. You've got the universe reclining in your hair, 'cause you're my baby.
I consider myself an artist, and a writer, poet, guitar player. So if that's what a star is, then I must be a star.
Mark was like a dynamo, right? And once he was cranked up and he was away, he used to come up to you, I don't know if you've seen lots of film, and Mark, and he comes up and he's playing and he's pushing so much energy, it doesn't matter if you had your arms sawn off or your legs sawn off, you carry on playing.
Telegram Sam is the moment, really. It was the first record on Mark's own record label, and that was pretty much a peak. He filmed that concert at the Empire Pool the month later. That was really the pinnacle of T-Rexy, and from there it was a sense of coasting for another year or so.
He really had lots to give. But what he really needed to do was listen to his real close friends rather than all the sycophants that were creeping into his life.
There's been a lot of talk about revolution. The only revolution that's going to happen is if people like myself or Mick Jagger or Rod Stewart or whoever try to get into other fields, be it television, be it movies. Then we will get a revolution. If it's left to other people, there'll be no revolution.
What was the name of the movie? Born to Boogie. You know, actually a movie, going to see Mark in a movie at the cinema. I suppose that was the peak of T-Rextasy, as they called it.
Some people like to rock. Some people like to roll.
Ringo's direction was very good in it. I don't think anybody but Ringo could have actually handled Mark at that period, and he probably wouldn't have listened to anybody other than Ringo.
I was trying to figure out whose ego trip it was. Ringo Starr is many things, God bless him, but a film director he isn't. Mark was entranced by Beatle cred, and Elton was along for the ride.
By about 72, 73, he started to believe his own mythology quite quickly then. That was the seeds of his downfall.
He could afford things that he couldn't afford before.
He made it. He joined the Mile High Pop Club, you know, he was there with Alice Cooper, Elton John, Ringo.
If you went out for a night on the tiles with that lot, there's a good chance you might not come back until the following month.
Really, we were all doing, too many drugs.
When June was looking after him, he wouldn't be allowed to have an aspirin in his makeup bag.
He loved being part of, he got to the top of his tree and he got out of history at the same time.
That whole showbizy thing did not appeal to me. It was against the philosophy of everything. Everything had to be totally real.
I could have loved you, girl, like a planet.
Marc Bolan had become show business.
I could have chained your heart to a star. But it really doesn't matter at all. No, it really doesn't matter at all. Life's a gas.
There was an increasing element of formula coming into play. They all began to sound a bit the same.
He got to the point where he was saying things like, look how easy it is. Look, recorded it, mixed it, and it's done. It's done. It's so easy. It's so cheap.
But I can't get no satisfaction. All I want is easy action.
Mark gave up trying after a while. He had this sort of magic, like he was baking a cake, and he had all the mixes, and that was it.
Bolan, by that point, had reached that space where hubris and cocaine become interchangeable.
He became quite unbearable.
When it's century boy, Fancy's fine, Fancy's good. Everybody says it's just like Robin Hood.
Rock and roll is magic. I mean, the elements of magic. What is magic is the power of the human being to relate to another human being.
He'd gone really dull and stupid and slow and arrogant.
Two human beings contact each other. The electricity creates a bondship, and that can move tables or minds or people's hearts.
I almost sort of left in tears because I was so horrified by this change in somebody.
The downfall of Marc Bolan was not lack of record sales or the problems he was having with the addictions that get into everyone's life but get blamed on rock and roll. I think that with Marc Bolan, it was fame, and fame skirting away is what scared him.
Put everyone's noses out in the band, his road crew, his managers, and it was a tough time to really love Marc.
And then this flipping Star, of course. I mean, that we couldn't get on some airplanes, we couldn't get it through doors and everything. This hydraulic Star that used to throw him. So when he used to piss me off, I used to sort of just set it a little bit more and give him a bit of kick. And sometimes he'd land a bit further than where he wanted to land,
It was very Spinal Tap. It was really that bad. It was people laughing.
He started to take them for granted, and one by one they all went.
I'd only had a £10 rise in that time, over 3 years. I just sensed it wasn't the same.
And for me it was getting shaky. I mean, I wasn't thinking the group was getting shaky. I was getting shaky. I was feeling nervous for me, because it's down to self-survival then.
A broken god.
And he became like Elvis on a bad trip, really.
Sweetly mouth touch.
He was still in his satins, but he'd sort of really filled out. And when you're that small, as I well know, you can't put on an ounce of flab without it showing.
People were calling him things like the Porky Pixie in live reviews and stuff.
The glittering chipolata. And I remember sort of reading that and going, God, that's really going to be hurtful to him. But at the same time, I thought, some journalistic part of me thought, I wish I'd thought of that.
The thing is, a lot of people were quite happy to see him fall because he was an arrogant little sod and he dissed a lot of people.
Most artists, it would appear, go through their Fat Elvis period, and Marc did. John Lennon did. This is part of the route. And really what's important is how you come out the other side, and if you come out the other side.
T-Rex were neither the first nor the last British act to sacrifice a great deal of their potential momentum at home in what was an essentially fruitless attempt to break the States.
The Slider, a new album by Mark Bolan.
Mark thought, this is it, I'm on the cover of Rolling Stone. He went over there, gung-ho, and fell flat on his face, literally, on a couple of occasions.
People come over to America with a large ego because they've had so much success in England, and then they expect to break America as quickly as they broke England, say, and it just doesn't work that way.
Gender bending, genre bending is very much an urban, coastal phenomenon. But, you know, you try that stuff in French Lick, Indiana, you'll be run out of town.
There was a completely different climate going on in America, that the war in Vietnam was still dragging on. And here you had a guy rushing in really glamorous costume saying it's time to party, you know, and everybody at the house is completely drunk and hungover. And it's really the last thing on their mind. They don't want to be doing that.
I don't think he handled that too well. He was depressed. He got very depressed during that whole time I was with him. I actually saw him in tears one night. We were playing with Three Dog Night, and they were headlining. And he used to wear this waistcoat, which was yellow feathers. Three Dog Night used to come up and say, "Hi man, how you doing? Where's the little duck?"
Even Mark, as detached as he was by that time, was aware that he'd overused the formula, and he wanted to bring in a new sound.
We do a 4-bar intro, and after that it's only 2 every time. We give it 4 to get our feel going. Let's just try it so we get the feel.
And Mark had always liked soul music, those Motown things, and he thought a key to America might have been some integrity in a soulful way.
By that time he met up with Gloria Jones, who was a backing singer for Joe Cocker, and she was instrumental in introducing him to the sounds of Black America at that time.
I was with Motown Records for 10 years as a record producer and songwriter. Before that time, I recorded a song called Tainted Love. Mark and I were friends, and then our relationship developed into love.
A lot of people chart the decline of Bolan, particularly from the moment that he'd fallen out with June and that he'd picked up with Gloria.
It really changed. I mean, I don't think it takes a genius to look at the transition in Mark's life as to what happened and see the difference in the two women.
Mark Bolan was a major feature of white music, and here comes a Black American, and she's been perceived as his backing singer. So, you know, maybe people didn't understand that she had a great deal to contribute to his sound.
Name another band where you could really hear those influences together. My mom with Motown, and then you have my dad's like rock and roll, like high pitch, you know.
Mark and I brought rock and R&B together. We started that type of sound. He was very disappointed when his fans weren't willing to follow him with his new ideas and his new music.
Mark and Gloria were like two wonderful loonies, giggling and laughing and singing their way through life. And then when Roland came along, teach him to play the tambourine quickly, you know.
The highlight of my life was meeting you.
Not even when I was born, even the day I was conceived, it was probably the day when my dad's life, he had something to live for again. Mark Bolan even told me how proud he was to have a son. I mean, imagine if I was a girl, that would have been horrible, because the first day I think he said Roland Bolan.
phoned me. I said, "Oh, Eric, she's had a little boy." I said, "Wonderful, Mazel tov, Bubbler, it's wonderful. What are you going to call it?" "Roland." I said, "Are you mad? Roland Boland? Are you sure? Roland Feld, maybe. No, Roland Boland." I said, "It rhymes, but it rhymes." I said, "You know, unlike your poetry, but it rhymed."
I've been told a lot of people are probably like thinking that I would hate the name, but I go to school with Sierra Swan, and I'm friends with her older sister Planet Swan, and it's Billy Swan who helped with Elvis and wrote I Can Help. And one day I was going over his house, I was walking up, and out of the car, and I hear, "Is that Rollin' Bowlin'? He's like, you got the best name in the industry." And
Did you ever see a woman coming out of New York City with a frog in her hand?
And I remember being alone with him for the first time in God knows how long and saying, "Mark, you're not Mark Feld, you're not that tasty little geezer." And he said, "I'm going to get fit." "How come you never got fat?" I said, "Because I never went over the top. I never overindulged. I went mad."
Once he realised that things had changed and he was going to have to work seriously hard to make up the ground he'd lost, he became likeable again.
Dreamy lady, won't you come to my
He was always current. When a person is creative, they have no limitations. So I never saw this Mark as a limited person.
to get acquainted with my head.
At first he didn't quite see what the punk thing was, but he suddenly twigged it might be useful to actually get back to basics.
He was the man with the calling card saying, "Come on in, this is a great, strange, ridiculous world that you can enter. You can look as ridiculous as you like, you can make as much noise as you like, you can be the centre of attention."
What was really exciting was that you were getting something that was going against this rigid form of what boys, girls, how they behave within society and what roles they play, and it really made you consider that you weren't a freak if you didn't fit in.
A lot of the punk stars like Billy Idol, The Damned, Susie obviously, they took Boland's template and took it to ridiculous extremes.
He had a lot of punk rock attitude, and I think we were able to pick up on that and use a lot of that.
With the program that he had, it felt like he was almost starting again, and he seemed to identify with what was going on at that time.
All right. Welcome to a new show called Mark.
When we talked about doing this series, I was almost offended at punk because it wasn't the sort of music I was into or liked.
Or an amazing group called Jam!
And Mark was the one who chivied me along and said, "Now come on, you know.
Boomtown Rats!"
And I said, "I don't think it's suitable." And I'd say, "Well, if I like it, they will."
There's a new group called Generation X who have a lead singer called Billy Idol, who's supposed to be as pretty as me.
I don't think we'd been on any TV programmes up until Mark. We'd only just about got over the ban of punk rock in London at the London nightclubs, let alone being on television.
It was like Mark is the godfather of punk, and it made you proud that you had been a T-Rex fan again.
He felt a kind of kindred thing with the punk because it was getting terrible slagging off, similar to a lot of things that were said about him by the same people.
Thank you for goodbye and all the boys in the band, David, everybody, all the cats, you know they are. This is a new song.
We were on the last show, which actually had David Bowie.
So Mark lost about 3-4 stones. He kicked most of the bad habits, looking like he might really be up for it. But sadly, it was never to be.
He was just going to sing, and he slipped off the stage, and it was there that they decided to cut the show. And that was odd too, because it was almost like a premonition or something. I don't know, something weird was going to happen.
Elvis dies, we were at dinner, and he said, oh, I'd hate to go now. Imagine, I'd only get a paragraph on page 3. Word for word. 4 weeks later, he had the front page.
We'd just come out of Olympic Stadium. We had driven along that road, just about there where he'd had crashed. And it came on the radio.
There was stories that the front left-hand tyre was not inflated to its proper pressure, and a couple of the wheel nuts weren't done up tight enough. Whether that was true or not, a little Mini, if he'd have been in a Mercedes or his roller, he'd have still been alive.
He was crazy about James Dean and said that, you know, one day he'd like to die in a car accident. He said, but it wouldn't be suitable for me to die in a Porsche, I'd have to die in a Mini. Now, he said that in 1966, which was an extraordinary thing to happen.
What happened was that a lot of people didn't realize that I nearly died in the crash. I survived, he died. He could have survived, I could have died. But the point is that you have to keep going.
It was devastating. For example, the clothes in our house, it took her 7 years to take them off the hangers.
When I lost him, it was like losing a part of myself. So what I did, I put that energy into raising our child.
Growing old together. Because Mark will be 50 this year. I only knew him as far as he was 29.
You just knew that Mark wasn't going to live to be old. You just sort of said, okay, you kind of got what you always wanted. that grand fame, the biggest fame there is. Dying too young and not being able to ever see him fail.
The same day he died, Maria Callas died. Same day. But he got front page and she got inside. I thought Mark would have been very pleased with that.
Gloria was wired up in her jaw. She was very scared of the rather cumbersome English process of law. It made her very nervous. In the end, she went home and can't come back, as far as I know. And the last thing she cared about was the estate.
The cult of the personality had reached ridiculous proportions. Fans had gravitated towards his house and so-called liberated some of the possessions there.
Everything was looted in the house, but this is one thing. It's kind of like it's one of the fixtures I've always grown up with. You know what I mean? I've always kind of had it to, you know, to look at, and at times I even start to play it a little every now and then when I kind of rehearse them. But I think I might tear it apart because it's kind of old. You can see it, you know. But it's like there's only so many artifacts that I really have.
Remember, keep a little mark in your heart, and we'll be back the same mark time, same mark channel. Meanwhile, this is Dandy in the Underworld.
Maybe he would have been like a sort of Little Richard character now, still wearing makeup and glitter and doing talk shows, and that would have been fabulous as well.
Mark used to talk about wanting to be a prince without a nationality and without an identity, and people wouldn't be able to see if he was one race or one culture or another. That's exactly what Michael Jackson copied.
Mark was putting the R&B influences with rock, which now is the music of today.
Made me think that, you know, you can do it. There is a space for us all.
As long as pop still is based around the 3-minute single, there'll always be a place for Mark Bolan at the centre of it.
Destruction he wanted, to destruction he fell.
If you listen to Oasis doing cigarettes and alcohol, it's Get It On. And if you listen to Get It On, It's Chuck Berry doing Little Queenie, and so on. Will the circle be unbroken? No.
I dance myself right out the womb. I dance myself right out the womb. Is it strange to dance so soon? I dance myself right out the womb.